Welcome to Twilight Fables, where childhood tales rot in the shadows and truths are stitched from screams. Tonight we begin a tale of vanity, madness, and a garment soaked in unseen blood. This is the Emperor's new clothes, the skin that shines. The city of Galenbrooke lay beneath a silver sun, its walls crowned with iron spires that pierced the pale sky like the teeth of a trap. Nothing moved without decree, and no decree passed without the seal of Emperor Othmar, a man so obsessed with his image he demanded statues of himself be updated weekly to reflect his latest refinements. His courtiers called it vision. His subjects whispered of rot beneath the gold leaf. Othmar had ruled for 21 years. In that time, the treasury had been emptied, not by war or famine, but by mirrors. Every palace chamber was lined with polished silver panels and enchanted glasses that offered not just reflection, but flattery. "You are divine," they whispered. "You are more than man." Othmar believed them. He was not always like this. The young Othmar had been a scholar king once, earnest and curious, but power seeped into him like oil into parchment. When the last advisor who dared speak of humility was thrown from the tower, something in the Emperor's face began to twist and never untwisted again. The city, though beautiful in architecture, had become sick. Artists painted only his likeness. Scribes recorded only his praises. Children were taught to cheer at portraits and bow before the empty throne. There were no dissenters anymore, not because of guards, but because the people had learned that truth did not matter if the Emperor did not believe it. And so it was that, on the eve of Othmar's yearly parade, when he walked among his people to receive their admiration, a carriage arrived from the west. It was plain and black, with no crest, yet the moment it crossed the gate, every dog in the city howled, and every mirror in the palace cracked. From the carriage stepped two strangers, draped in tattered red robes. They called themselves weavers, but not of silk or linen. No, they claimed to weave the divine thread, a fabric seen only by those worthy of its radiance, spun from something they never named, something that made the gods avert their eyes and the court magicians draw protective runes in the air. The Empress, long silent and barely visible in court, turned her face away as they entered. She whispered a single word under her breath, "Skin," and then excused herself from the hall and was not seen again. The taller of the two weavers had eyes like ink poured into water. His companion had no eyes at all, only stitched lids that trembled when he smiled. They spoke not to the Emperor, but to his reflection, addressing it with reverence and awe. And this pleased Othmar more than any flattery ever had. They told him their garments were for gods, not men. They said mortal fabric dulled the spirit, that to ascend To truly rule, he must don the invisible mantle of worth, one stitched not from thread, but devotion, faith, sacrifice. And so they began their work in a vaulted chamber of the west wing, behind curtains of blackened velvet. The tailors set up their loom. No servants were allowed near. Only the emperor himself could witness their progress, and even then, only through a thin veil of scented smoke. They spoke in riddles, sang in tongues, and bled into their own work, slicing fingers and drawing glyphs in their blood. Within days, the emperor began to change. He stopped sleeping. His eyes grew wide, luminous, unblinking. He paced at night, murmuring of fire and flesh. He said he could hear the garment whisper. "It calls to me," he told the court. "It knows my name. It sees the God I've hidden in flesh." When the high priest tried to intervene, begging Othmar to renounce this madness, his tongue was torn out and displayed at the palace gates. A relic of disbelief, the emperor called it. Soon, the weavers announced the garment was complete, but there was nothing on the mannequin but bone hooks and runes carved into wood. "You see it, yes?" the taller one asked, voice like silk rotting. Othmar nodded, tears streaming down his cheeks. "It is glorious," he whispered. They helped him dress in it, or rather undress. He shed his robes, his underclothes, and stood naked before the court, trembling, not with shame, but ecstasy. The crowd gathered for the grand parade was immense. Every citizen was required to attend. Banners fluttered, drums rolled, and incense burned in censers held by children with glazed eyes. Then came the emperor. He walked barefoot through the marble streets, arms outstretched, his body pale and marked with red sigils. Around him shimmered an aura that made the air ripple, though whether it was heat or madness, no one could say. No one spoke, not a whisper, not a gasp, because they saw it too, or rather, they saw what they were told they should see, and their denial fed the thing that clung to Othmar's skin. A child in the crowd tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Why is the emperor bleeding?" She slapped the child without looking. "He is not. He shines." The tailors stood at the procession's end, hands clasped, humming softly. The taller one nodded to the stitched-lid companion, who began to murmur. That was when the crowd began to itch. Not a tickle, but a searing, crawling sensation beneath their skin. It started as sweat, then turned to blistering heat. Those who looked away felt their faces sting. Those who stared too long heard their own eyes whisper lies. "He is clothed, you are wrong. Worship, or be devoured." Back in the palace, every mirror shattered completely, all except one. In the emperor's chamber, the last mirror began to bleed, and still Othmar walked. The garment was no longer invisible, but only the mad could see it. And now madness was spreading. In the quiet corners of the city, citizens began murmuring prayers they didn't know they knew. They whispered in tongues not heard, since the foundation stones were laid, and those who resisted, their skin itched until it split. At the edge of the city, in the hollowed bones of an abandoned cathedral, a group had gathered, former scholars, physicians, and guards, all shaken, eyes bloodshot, speaking only in fragments. Among them sat a woman wrapped in mourning grey, the Empress. She had shared her royal silks the night the weavers arrived. Beneath her shawl, runes had been burned into her back, words etched years ago in secret by a dying seer who'd warned her of the day when faith and flesh would merge. "It's begun," she said, her voice hoarse. "They've spun a veil from our disbelief." One of the scholars, an old man who had once been the royal archivist, clutched an ancient tome wrapped in flesh-coloured leather. He opened it slowly, as if afraid the pages might bite. "I found it in the forbidden vault beneath the North Tower," he said. "It predates the kingdom by centuries. A cult once worshipped a being known only as the looming god. Their belief was that reality could be rewoven through flesh and ritual, that what was seen could be undone if enough people refused to question it." He turned to a page inked in dried blood. A sketch showed a figure crowned in thread, wearing a robe of screaming faces. The caption beneath read, "When all believe, the lie becomes flesh. When none resist, the world is stitched anew." The Empress stood, trembling. "Othmar isn't wearing a garment," she whispered. "He is the garment now, or becoming it." In the palace, Othmar no longer spoke. He hummed, throat vibrating with tones that made the floorboards creak. He stood before the shattered mirror, now seeping black ichor from its frame, and watched himself. The skin that once clung to his frame had taken on an unnatural sheen, as though lacquered. Symbols crawled like insects across his chest, rearranging themselves with each breath. The tailors moved around him silently, adjusting air, smoothing nothing. Every movement seemed to tighten the fabric of the world itself. Time lagged in their presence. Servants sent into the chamber forgot who they were. Some came out chanting, others didn't come out at all. The blind tailor began engraving words into the marble walls using only his fingernail. Those words burned. "He who is believed becomes truth. Worship, the visible unseen. The thread needs flesh." The parade had changed everything. Now, statues of the emperor were redone to reflect his new attire. Sculptors were instructed to carve not his features, but his essence, a vague swirling of tendrils and screaming mouths hidden in elegance. Those who failed to do so properly vanished. The official city anthem was rewritten to include the line, "We praise the cloth that binds us all." But the infection wasn't just in statues and songs, it was in the people. The more they believed in the beauty of the invisible garment, the more they saw it, not as a blank, but as a living thing, silk, that shimmered like wet skin, patterns that pulsed, stitches that moved, and when they believed enough, the garment would reward them. A merchant was the first to be blessed. He shouted in the town square that he'd seen the emperor's robes in a dream and felt its warmth. He said the garment had spoken to him, told him secrets of power. He lifted his shirt to reveal a glowing symbol newly etched across his stomach. By sunset, he'd grown a second mouth in his chest. It whispered prayers non-stop. The next morning, his entire family had joined him, kneeling around his body, repeating the words. The cult had returned, and this time it wore the crown. The Empress and her small resistance moved underground into the labyrinthine catacombs that had once been used to hide heretics. Now they were the only sane ones left. She pored over every book, every scroll the old archivist had brought with him. Somewhere there had to be a way to break the weave. What if we show the people what's really there? One of the younger guards asked. What if we rip the veil away? But the Empress shook her head. It won't work. It doesn't matter what's true, only what's believed. If we make them see the truth, they'll gouge out their own eyes just to keep the lie alive. The archivist leaned forward. There is one method mentioned in the older texts, a counter-thread, a sacrifice not of flesh but of memory. A person must willingly forget their entire self, name, face, bloodline, and be sewn into the weave to twist it. They become the untruth within the truth. He swallowed. But they don't come back. Everyone fell silent. Then the Empress stood. I'll do it. High above the city, in the tower chamber, the tailors prepared the final blessing. The cloak was ready for merging. Othmar stood beneath a canopy of bone, arms outstretched, his skin sloughing away in thin sheets that hovered mid-air like banners. The taller tailor removed a needle, the length of a sword. It was carved from a saint's spine. He approached the emperor and raised it, but before the ritual could begin, the walls of the chamber shook. A wind blew in, not from any window, but from within the palace itself. A voice echoed up the corridors. Unweave. The tailors froze. The mirror cracked further, black fluid bubbling from the edges. The emperor turned slowly. For the first time in days, his eyes blinked. The empress had entered the chamber, but she was not herself. Her eyes were white. Her hair had turned ashen. Around her neck, a noose of thread, dyed with blood, tightened with each step. She was becoming the counter-thread, and she walked straight into the emperor's arms. As they embraced, reality hiccuped. The threads recoiled. The walls of the palace shimmered, then faded into forests, into oceans, into screaming mouths and silent graves. The world wobbled, and in that brief moment, the people of Galenbrooke, those who still remembered, saw the truth. The emperor wore no robe, only skin, not his own, and the garment, it was hungry, In the wake of the Empress's embrace, the palace seemed to fracture, not with sound, but with silence, a silence so complete it rang through the minds of everyone in Galenbrooke like a broken bell. In the Emperor's chamber, time stuttered. The walls dissolved into a rolling veil of colourless fabric. Threads dangled from the air itself, twitching as if alive. The chandeliers twisted into upside-down cages, each containing a flickering shape that may once have been birds. The floor buckled like flesh under a hot knife. The Emperor's mouth split from ear to ear. He whispered, "At last," and his voice echoed inside the minds of all present. The tailors dropped to their knees, not in awe, but in exhaustion. Their eyes had turned to thread, actual strands of sinew and silk spooling out across their cheeks. The Empress, still wrapped in the counterthread, stared into Othmar's eyes, or what remained of them. Her pupils were mirrors now, reflecting nothing but the lie. "I gave myself to the unweaving," she said softly, "so let it begin." The blind tailor shrieked and began clawing at his chest, ripping open the robe he wore. Beneath it was not flesh, but a loom made of ribs, churning steadily with pale sinews. The taller tailor tried to stop him, but the Empress reached out and touched the air between them, and the gesture alone split his face into threads, unraveling him like cloth soaked in acid. He did not scream, he wept with joy. "My thread has been chosen." Far below, in the city catacombs, the resistance felt the shift. The archivist's eyes rolled back in his skull, and he collapsed, convulsing. Symbols branded across his body began to pulse like infected wounds. The younger guard, Elias, gripped the stone wall, gasping for air. "They're unmaking it," he choked. "The palace, the lie, it's fighting back." Dozens of citizens had fled to the underground tunnels. In the days since the parade, many were sick, some mad, a few already bearing the marks of belief, sigils burned into their skin that could not be washed or cut away. Now all of them felt it, the battle above. The Empress, in sacrificing her memory, had become a disruption in the divine weave, a snag, a defect, and the garment did not tolerate flaws. Elias turned to the archivist. "If she fails, what happens to us?" The old man, eyes wide and distant, spoke in a hollow tone. "We won't remember there was ever anything else." In the palace, Othmar clutched the Empress in one hand. His skin flayed itself with every movement, revealing layer upon layer of glistening thread beneath. His bones were no longer human. They bent in impossible directions, forming the beginnings of a throne from his own spine. The Empress fought to stay tethered to herself, but her memories were bleeding. Her name faded first, then her childhood, her first dance, her mother's lullaby, the scent of jasmine in the spring. Each moment sacrificed, fed the unweaving. The chamber around them trembled. Reality was thinning. The mirrors that once served as sycophants now howled with laughter and cracked open, leaking shadows, courtiers who had lingered too close to the ritual chamber burst into flame without fire, consumed by shame. They could no longer hide behind belief. And still, the people outside sang, because the lie was too beautiful to let go. In the city square, children played beneath banners depicting the emperor's garments, portraits that now bled when looked at too long. A baker screamed as his reflection crawled out of the mirror and strangled him. A seamstress stitched her own fingers into a cloth that would not stop growing, begging the emperor's forgiveness for ever wearing wool. The entire city was under enchantment, not a spell cast with wands or incantations, but one spun from faith and repetition, the same words, the same lie, day after day, until reality bowed to it. But then came the Empress's final act. Inside the throne chamber, she collapsed, not from pain, but from absence. There was no memory left in her, not even the knowledge that she had done something noble. She was hollow, an echo in human form, and that emptiness was the floor. Othmar screamed. His form rippled and burst into flame, not of fire, but of unraveling. The divine threads that held his existence taut began to fray. The skin that shone peeled away, revealing not muscle or bone, but a gaping hole where a soul should have been. He had become belief, and now belief was breaking. Across Galenbrooke, people clutched their heads. The spell fought to hold, but the counter-thread had infected the weave. The city's song skipped, voices cracking, hymns faltering. A statue of the emperor exploded in the plaza, its face melting into ash. A child pointed at the palace and screamed, "He's naked, he's bleeding!" And this time, no one slapped her for saying so. In the depths of the city, the archivist stood and wept. "It's working," he whispered. "She's undoing the cloth." But then Elias gasped, "The mirror, look!" One of the enchanted mirrors stolen from the palace, once inert, now glowed with blinding light. It showed the emperor not as he had been during the parade, but as he truly was, a tangle of twisted limbs, a face stretched over bone, draped in human hides, stitched into regal shape, a throne of screaming mouths, and beneath it all, the Empress, still standing, barely, but behind her, something else was forming. The looming god, the ancient force the cult worshipped had sensed the breach in its reality, a tear in its sacred weave, and now it reached through Othmar's unraveling body to claim a vessel. The Empress. She stood at the threshold of forgetting, surrounded by floating scraps of thought. She didn't know who she was or what she was doing, but the thing behind her whispered promises. It could give her memory back. It could make her a god. It could sew her into eternity. All she had to do was let go, and for a moment she considered it. But then A single memory shimmered in the void, a whisper, a voice once familiar. You are not your crown, you are not your reflection, you are not what they see, you are what you choose. The voice of a friend, a maid, perhaps, or a sister. She didn't know, but it was hers, and that was enough. She turned away from the looming god. She spoke a single word, no. And with that, the chamber collapsed inward. Othmar shrieked as his form exploded into strands of wet red thread. The tailors screamed as their own flesh unravelled, dragged screaming into the gaps between seconds. The palace walls tore apart, turning to cloth, then ash, then nothing. The mirror in the catacombs shattered, and in the city above, a terrible silence descended once more. But this time, it was real. When the dust settled, there was no palace. Where once stood the towering structure of marble and gold, its spires a symbol of Othmar's vanity, there now lay only a crater. At its centre, a single thread, black as void, and swaying gently, as though caught in a wind no one could feel. It hummed, not with sound, but with vibration, a deep note beneath hearing, like the memory of thunder, or the echo of a scream you never allowed yourself to hear. Anyone who approached the crater could feel it in their bones. Galenbrooke was no longer the city it had been. Its citizens wandered the streets in silence, eyes glassy, mouths stitched shut by their own hands, or by the threads that sprouted like veins across buildings, doorways, and even skin. There were no banners now, no mirrors, no songs of praise, only a single law etched in blood across the city gates. Thou shalt not see, for those who had truly believed in the Emperor's garment, the unraveling had left holes in their minds, gaping absences where names, faces, and even the concept of shame had once lived. A mother looked at her child and did not remember giving birth. A teacher opened her lesson book and found only blank pages. A man who had sculpted 100 statues of Othmar now stared at his chisel, unsure what it was for. Denial had been their anchor, and now, with the lie gone, they drifted. Beneath the city, in the safety of the catacombs, Elias stumbled into the silence of the resistance. The air was thick with dust and confusion. The mirrors that once showed truth now displayed only static, like snow falling upward. The old archivist lay slumped beside a brazier, eyes open but unfocused. Elias knelt beside him. "Sir, the palace, it's gone. She did it." The old man blinked once. His lips moved. "I know." His hand trembled as he pointed to the remnants of the shattered mirror. Within the broken glass, a reflection shimmered. Not Elias's, not the chamber's, the Empress, or what was left of her. She stood in the ruins of the throne chamber, her back turned, her figure swathed in something not quite cloth, threads that seemed to flicker between visibility and non-existence, curling around her like smoke in reverse. Her hair had turned silver, her skin glowed faintly, etched with the echo of runes once burned away. "She lives," Elias whispered, but the archivist shook his head slowly. "She remains. That's not the same. The Empress, or the memory that remained of her, now walked the weft. The weft was not a place. It was a seam between places, a liminal tapestry, where memory, truth, and story were stitched into the bones of the world. She did not remember her name, her life, or the man she had unmade, but she remembered purpose. That was all she needed. As she walked the weft, the looming god's presence stalked her. It was no longer a being of robes and spindles. Now it was voice, idea, infection. The tailors had died, but their prayers lingered, echoing through the gaps between thought and silence. The god wanted her to turn back. It whispered truths, half-truths, promises of power and belonging, but she walked on. In the distance, she could see fragments of other worlds, other emperors, other lies, a king draped in fire who could not burn, a queen whose tears turned to gold as her people starved, a prophet wrapped in scrolls that wrote themselves in blood. Each was a lie so believed it had become real. Each fed the looming god. She was not the first, she would not be the last, but she had unmade one, and so she kept walking. In Galenbrooke, something began to stir. Where the crater had formed, the single black thread began to braid itself. Slowly, inch by inch, it coiled into a spindle, standing upright, humming louder, and with it came changes. People began to see things that weren't there. A man who had once served as a court scribe claimed he saw the emperor walking the alleys at night, whispering through the fog. A woman who ran a bakery found loaves in her oven. She did not remember baking, each one carved with the emperor's sigil, bleeding when sliced. And the children began to draw again, but not with chalk or ink, with hair, long strands, black and glistening, that sprouted from their fingertips. They drew on the walls, on each other, on their parents, symbols, runes, the same ones the tailors had used. Elias had become the reluctant leader of the remnants. With the archivist now catatonic, the others turned to him for answers he didn't have. He spent each night walking the streets in secret, mapping the spread of the thread's influence. Wherever it appeared, people followed, gathering in groups, humming, drawing, worshipping. One night, he found himself drawn back to the crater. He stood at its edge, staring down into the slow, circular spiral of thread. He felt the vibration in his feet, his chest, his teeth. Then he heard her voice, not the Empress, but her echo. "You cannot cut the thread, only reweave it." Elias turned. No one was there, only a single frayed strand fluttering in the breeze. He knelt and picked it up and felt his memory shift. He remembered his father's death, But now, it had happened differently. He remembered his childhood, but now the house was made of silk, not stone. The thread was changing his past. He dropped it. It burned away into ash, but the damage was done. Elsewhere in the city, a new group had begun to form, not a resistance, a revival. They called themselves the Weftborn. Draped in robes made of scavenged curtains and dyed bed sheets, they gathered nightly at the crater, whispering hymns in reverse. They claimed to see the truth, claimed that the Empress had not saved them, but betrayed them, that the Emperor had become a god, and that his garment had simply not yet completed its transformation. They began sewing again, with whatever materials they could find, leather, hair, teeth, and they sang as they worked. We are the stitch, we are the flesh, he wears us still. Elias realized something horrifying. The Emperor was dead, but the idea of him had survived, and the threads that now grew across Galenbrooke weren't remnants of his garment. They were roots, spreading, searching for a new host, someone vain enough, broken enough, willing enough to wear the skin that shines. The boy's name was Lorien. He was 10 years old when the Emperor vanished, swallowed by thread and ash. His mother never spoke of that day, not directly. She only said, "We don't talk about the lie, and we don't stare too long at the crater." But Lorien stared. Every day on his way to the broken academy steps, he paused to look at the black thread that now stood where the palace had been. It had grown. It no longer swayed in the wind, but pulsed as though it had found a heartbeat of its own. Around it, the Weftborn built shrines of bone and cloth, whispering in spirals and weaving songs from the hair of the dead. Lorien did not understand their words, but he knew what he had seen. He had seen the Emperor bleeding. He remembered it with perfect clarity. The shining body, the raw red runes, the way the skin peeled back like curtain fabric. Everyone had called it divine. Everyone had said it was beauty, but Lorien had known it was wrong, and that was why he had not spoken since. Not a word in 5 years. His mother called it trauma. The city physicians called it a curse, but Lorien knew better. Speaking meant affirming the world around you, giving it permission to be what others said it was, and Lorien had seen what lies could become. So he watched and waited. Elias had begun to lose sleep. Every night the Weftborn grew bolder. Their gatherings became processions. Cloaked figures wandered through Galenbrooke, bearing lanterns made of hollowed skulls, singing in that same spiralling, backward tongue. They weren't recruiting. They didn't have to. The city itself seemed to be turning toward them, like a flower to the sun. Every day, new strands appeared. They coiled around doorways, crept through cobblestones, dangled from chimney flues like tendrils. People stopped removing them. Some even began wearing them, twisting the black threads into necklaces, belts, garlands. Even Elias had to admit something horrifying. The threads were beautiful, not conventionally, but in a way that pulled at something primal. The sheen, the curve, the gentle shimmer in twilight. It was as if the garment had learned how to make itself appealing. And then came the first revelation. In the town square, one of the Wefborn ascended the statue of Saint Yvessa, a once revered scholar who had preached against imperial vanity. Her likeness had stood for generations. The Wefborn draped a robe over her stone shoulders, not just any robe, the robe, or a piece of it, recovered, they claimed, from the Emperor's chamber, preserved, glowing faintly. Whether it was real or not didn't matter. What mattered was how the crowd reacted. They bowed, one by one, even those who had once resisted, even Elias's own scouts, even the priests of the cleansing flame, who had once tried to burn the Emperor's likeness from every home. And as they bowed, they saw it. The statue blinked, stone cracked, and the robe moved. Lorien was there, standing at the edge of the crowd. He did not bow. He did not move. He only stared, and in that moment, the robe turned its attention to him. It did not speak, but he felt it. A question. Do you see? Lorien blinked slowly, and for the first time in 5 years, he whispered one word. No. That night, he dreamed of thread, but it was not black. It was golden. It weaved around his fingers like sunlight through tall grass. And in that dream, someone stood at the edge of the horizon. A woman with silver hair and eyes like cracked glass. The Empress. Not whole, not real. A memory stitched into thought. She did not speak, but she offered him something. A single thread, gleaming with memory. When he took it, it burned into his palm, and he awoke, screaming. Elias found Lorien 3 days later in the ruins of the academy, sitting beneath the broken bell tower. You spoke, Elias said, stunned. I heard you. The crowd heard you. Lorien didn't respond. He only showed his hand. Etched into the skin was a thread-shaped scar, still warm to the touch. Elias crouched beside him. Do you know what it means? Lorien turned, finally meeting Elias's eyes. I saw the Emperor's skin, he said, voice trembling. I saw the runes, but I also saw what was underneath. Elias swallowed. What was it? The boy's face darkened. Nothing. There was nothing inside. In the weeks that followed, Lorien became a symbol. Whispers spread of the boy who had denied the robe, who had resisted the second awakening. The Wefborn dismissed him as a heretic, but many others began following him, not as a leader, but as a witness, because for all their faith and all their chanting, no Wefborn had ever dared say what they actually saw. Only Lorien had looked and survived. Elias took him in, built protections around him, gathered those still capable of remembering the truth. They formed a new circle, neither resistance nor cult, a reweaving. Lorien called it the unstitching. They would not fight the garment with swords or fire. They would fight it with story. They began to tell the truth, not of the Emperor, that was too late, but of themselves, the reweavers, farmers, soldiers, poets, wrote down their real histories, unvarnished, unglorified, the pains, the mistakes, the flaws. They read them aloud in quiet gatherings, and when they did, the thread shrieked, whole strands caught fire, the statue of Saint Yvessa cracked in half, the robe vanished, the weft-born, for the first time, fled. The looming god stirred again. From deep in the weft, it felt the loss of its grip. The unraveling had begun once more, and in the darkness it turned its eye toward the boy, a vessel of truth, a mouth that could deny, a dangerous thread. Lorien felt it watching him as he slept. It offered him a new robe, made not from human skin, but from stories. All he had to do was wear it, and become the truth emperor. He sat up in bed, sweating, trembling. No, he whispered again, and somewhere in the deep, something screamed. The city of Galenbrooke had split, not by war, nor by decree, but by perception. On one side were the weft-born, who worshipped the garment as gospel, and believed the emperor had not died, only ascended, woven into the looming God's will, waiting to be reborn in flesh, willing and pure. To them, the unraveling was not destruction, but cocooning. On the other side were the unstitchers, those who followed Lorien, the boy who refused to lie. They didn't wear robes or chant. They didn't burn effigies or bear weapons. Instead, they told stories, raw, unadorned, unflinching. Their truth was ugly, often shameful, but it was theirs, and in the space between them, the threads had begun to change. They no longer grew silently, now they listened. One morning, a woman from the tailors' district, once a weft-born, now sick with doubt, woke to find her body wrapped tightly in thread, not coiled or tangled, sewn. Her lips had been stitched shut in the night, her fingers fused together in a cradle of silver filament. But worst of all was what she saw in the mirror. Her reflection smiled at her. She had not smiled in days. It whispered, "You miss the warmth, the belonging. Let us wrap you in memory." When she screamed against the stitches, the reflection cried instead. Across Galenbrooke, this became more common. Mirrors no longer reflected what stood before them, but what you believed should be there. A grieving father saw his dead son, asking him to kneel. A lonely widow saw her long-lost husband, offering her the emperor's cloak with outstretched arms. Those who refused, the mirrors cracked and bled. Elias and the unstitchers held nightly gatherings in the old theatre. The stage had once held courtly plays and morality tales. Now it hosted something simpler, confession. One by one, survivors stepped forward and told their truths. I worshipped a statue of him. I slapped my daughter when she said he was naked. I sewed thread into my scalp to feel closer to him. I watched the tailors take a prisoner. I told myself he was a volunteer. With each story, the thread webs that hung from the rafters hissed and curled. The very walls of the theatre wept amber tears, but the room held, because truth, real truth, cannot be stitched over. Lorien sat at the centre of it all. He did not speak often, but when he did, the room quieted with reverence. His words weren't loud, they weren't poetic, but they were seen. He told them about the Emperor's flesh, about the moment he saw that beneath the sigils and gleaming robes was not a man, but a hollow. He told them the garment hadn't given power, it had fed on shame, and when belief turned shame into worship, it became flesh. You cannot sew divinity onto a lie, he said. It unravels, always. Then one night, the looming god answered. It did not arrive as fire or shadow. It came as a needle, a single silver spike, driven deep into the stage beneath Lorien's feet during the final confession of the night. No one saw it land. One moment, the wood was bare. Next, the needle stood upright, humming faintly. Its presence froze the room, not with fear, with invitation. Inscribed on the shaft were words in looping, divine script. A needle does not choose, it obeys the hand that threads it. Elias tried to pull it free. It did not budge. A woman tried to touch it. It sliced open her palm. No blood, only dust. Lorien approached. The needle tilted toward him. He stared at it for a long time, then turned away. That was when the theatre shifted. The curtains caught fire, but gave no heat. The rafters bent inward, like a jaw. The threads above began stitching themselves into a tapestry that depicted the future. Lorien saw it all. Himself, seated on a throne of mirrors, wearing a crown of braided hair. A city, worshipping him not for truth, but because he refused to lie. A robe, not of skin, but of stories, all praising him, all beautiful, all false. And he felt it, how easy it would be to step into it, to become the Emperor of Truth. But he also saw the price. To stop the looming god, someone had to wear the lie, not to rule, but to bind it, to trap it inside themselves forever. The needle whispered, you will speak, and they will believe. You will shine, and they will kneel. You will hurt, but they will love you. This time, the lie will heal. Lorien stepped away from the needle. I won't be another Othmar. But the theatre laughed. It wasn't the looming god. It was the people. Because the longer they stared, the more they saw what they wanted. And some wanted a king, a god, a shape to kneel before. Not truth, not uncertainty, just certainty dressed in a child's face. A boy who looked and lived. The theatre cracked. The unstitchers began to fracture. Some fell to their knees before Lorien. Others screamed. Elias pulled the boy away and fled into the alleys as the walls collapsed behind them. The needle remained, standing, waiting. That night, Lorien stared at the burned theatre from a rooftop. The robe would return in a new form, in a new mind. The looming god could wait. It had time, it had faith, and faith was thread, but Lorien still had his scar. He rubbed it absently. Truth can't kill it, he said to Elias. Truth just slows it. Elias nodded slowly. Then what do we do? Lorien turned to him. We sew a better lie. Elias blinked. You mean, fight it with its own weapon? No, Lorien said. We trick the thread into stitching something it can't control. What? A story that ends. The loom within the weft began to turn faster. Unseen by mortal eyes, it spun fibres of belief across realms, threading truth and illusion together with needlepoint precision. In the centre sat the looming god, or what was left of it, no longer a shape or voice, but pattern, instinct, hunger. It wove, because that was all it knew how to do. But in Galenbrooke, the thread began to tangle. Lorien's refusal echoed through the weft like a dropped pin in a St. Cathedral. It wasn't a roar, it wasn't fire, it was a glitch in the divine weave, and the pattern stuttered. It remembered the Emperor's fall. It remembered the Empress's defiance. And now it remembered the boy who would not wear the robe. The weave had never encountered this before. A lie built to unmake itself. Elias brought Lorien deep beneath the city, past the catacombs, into the thread-wound vault, a place built before Galenbrooke had a name, sealed by 7 keys of bone. Most had forgotten it even existed. Most had wanted to forget. Inside, the walls were made of old fabric, not thread or silk, but woven time. Tapestries stitched with human lives, embroidered with events that had once happened, or nearly did. They shimmered in and out of sight. On one wall, the Emperor was shown ascending into the sky, wrapped in holy light. On another, he was seen devoured by his own crown. Another depicted the weft, swallowing Galenbrooke entirely, turning it into a moving, living garment worn by something enormous and faceless. These are all outcomes the thread has considered, Elias whispered. Then why hasn't it chosen one? Lorien asked. Elias placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. Because your denial broke the script. In the vault's centre stood a mirror, but not of glass. It was made of memory. If you looked into it, you saw the story the thread wanted you to believe most. Lorien stepped before it and saw himself, older, wiser, crowned, robed in golden thread that shimmered with living stories. He was loved, adored, followed, not because he was good, but because he had survived, because he had looked and spoken the truth when no one else dared. It was a beautiful lie, and it sickened him. He turned away, and for the first time in centuries, the mirror cracked. That was when the weft struck back. Across Galenbrooke, the threads rioted. They slithered down chimneys and into throats, coiling around lungs and memories. People screamed as their own histories rewrote themselves. Mid-sentence, a father forgot he ever had children. A seamstress remembered making the Emperor's robes, though she never had. A soldier awoke to find his uniform stitched with names he did not know. medals he had never earned for wars that never happened. The weft was trying to overwrite everything, to stabilize the story, to erase the flaw. Lorien emerged from the vault with a plan. He didn't tell Elias everything, not yet. He just said, "We're going to write an ending. Not a happy one, not a victorious one, but an ending the thread would be forced to accept." "We'll need a needle," Elias said. "I know where one is," Lorien replied. "The stage, the silver spike, the cursed gift of the looming god. They would use it, but not how it intended." As they prepared, the Weftborn made their move. They had chosen a new vessel, a woman named Mireia, a former court painter who had spent years painting false portraits of the Emperor, each more glorious and impossible than the last. She had believed deeply, and when the unraveling came, her guilt had hollowed her into the perfect host. They draped her in the surviving thread, not skin, but memory cloth, fabric woven from denial, worship, shame. She became the Sea Mother, the Weft's prophet reborn, and she spoke only one phrase: "He comes again, and this time we will not look away." Lorien and Elias infiltrated the ruined theatre on the night of Mireia's anointing. The needle still stood where it had landed, but now it pulsed, breathing. Around it, the Weftborn sang, their robes tighter, their mouths stitched into soft, permanent smiles. Their eyes no longer blinked. Mireia stood on the stage, arms raised, light pouring from the runework traced across her skin. The robe, new, glistening, thrumming, wrapped around her like a second soul. As Lorien stepped into the aisle, the needle turned. Elias reached for his sword. Lorien stopped him. "This is how it has to happen." The boy walked slowly toward the stage. Mireia's voice boomed, not from her throat, but from the walls. "Do you come to kneel?" Lorien said nothing. The Weftborn surrounded him. They did not touch him. The thread would not allow them to. "You are the vessel," Mireia declared. "The loom chose you before you were born. Let the pattern hold. Let the robe complete." And then Lorien reached the needle. He looked into its length and saw the end, his own death, his memory absorbed into the cloth, his truth lost in the weave. Unless... He picked up the needle and stabbed it into his own palm. The weft screamed. The robe recoiled, because instead of wearing the garment, Lorien wrote into it. He forced his pain, his memory, his ending, into the thread. He told a story where the Emperor never rose again, where the robe unravelled, where belief was not enough to create truth, and as the blood soaked the needle, the loom began to tangle. The Sea Mother shrieked. Her robe caught fire, not flame, but doubt. Faces of those she had forgotten began to appear in the fabric. Her sister, her first love, the servant she betrayed, all truths she had buried in her devotion. They screamed as the thread writhed, coiling into knots that could not be untied. The theatre buckled, and the robe fell. Lorien collapsed. Elias caught him. the weft-born scattered, the needle, now blackened, cracked, and for a moment the city was still. No song, no whisper, no thread, just silence. Then Lorien opened his eyes. I wrote the end, and in the sky above the stars blinked, as if acknowledging the first stitch. They could not follow. The crater where the palace once stood was now a pit of ash and whispering wind. Galenbrooke was quiet, not peaceful, quiet in the way a wound quiets after the bleeding stops. The threads that had once wrapped the city like vines had fallen limp. They coiled in gutters and rooftops, no longer glowing, no longer moving. The weft had been severed, not destroyed, but forced into retreat. And it was Lorien who had done it, the boy who had seen the Emperor's skin and spoken the word no. He sat now in the ruins of the theatre, his bandaged hand resting on the cracked stage, the blackened needle beside him. It no longer pulsed. Its surface had dulled, like a tool buried too long. Across from him, Elias sat cross-legged, watching the boy's face for signs of pain. "You're sure it's done?" Elias asked. Lorien's voice was a whisper. Not done, but buried. They had written the lie with an end, not a victory, not a sacrifice, an ending, a truth the looming god could not twist, because it held no glory, no reverence, no worship. The Emperor had died, the robe had failed, the people had looked, and that was enough. But the city still bore scars. Some who had worn the robe's thread never came back. Their minds remained in loops, murmuring praises to an emperor who no longer existed. Some of the weft-born vanished entirely, either swallowed by the loom before its collapse, or lost within the mirrored folds of their own devotion. Others came crawling back. One of them, Mireia, the sea mother, was found days later in the temple baths, naked and burned, her skin covered in hand-stitched messages. "I am not divine. I am not divine. I am not divine." She could no longer speak, but she could cry. The first real thing she'd done in years. Lorien became a myth. Some called him the boy emperor, others the unthreaded, but he rejected all names. He refused statues, he refused portraits, he let them forget his face. "I'll not become a garment," he said, "not even one they think is good." Instead, he worked quietly. He travelled from city to city, telling stories not of emperors or gods, but of doubt, stories with wrong endings, with broken heroes, with lies uncovered before they could bloom. He taught children to look, to question what shines, to see the skin beneath the silk. The looming god still exists, in the weft, somewhere beyond thread and bone. It waits. Its hands are idle, but not gone. It hums in the corners of songs, in the rise of movements that promise too much beauty for too little truth. But it is wary now, because someone, once, wrote an ending it did not approve, and it bled. Years later, a new ruler took Galenbrooke's throne, not crowned, chosen, They sat not in a marble hall, but on a wooden bench before the people. Their garments were plain, their mirror had been broken. They asked no praise, only questions. And beneath the throne, buried in stone, was the blackened needle, cold, still. But near it, sealed in a glass case, was a single torn scrap of thread, burned at the edges, humming faintly with memory. The plaque read, "This was once called divine." It wasn't. And every citizen, young and old, was taught that phrase on their first day of school. They repeated it together, not as worship, but as warning. This was once called divine. It wasn't. And they remembered, not the emperor, not the robe, but the boy who refused to lie. And in the weft, where echoes form, the loom stirs. It considers new shapes. It listens for the shine of silence and waits patiently for someone to forget, because it always begins with forgetting. But for now, the needle sleeps, the robe is folded, and truth, raw, ugly, necessary truth, holds the final stitch.